Recording in progress.
بسم الله بسم الله. السلام عليكم. طيب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. صلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا ولا من أهلنا شقيا ولا محروما. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله, all of you, and welcome to Hadith 121 for this winter semester. We are passing around a printout of the emails and acronyms or initials of whomever have registered. So some of you might not be on that paper. So please do add your name and email to this page. And if you are adding your name, you might want also to indicate whether you want to be registered as an audit or credit or just a visitor. You're all welcome. I think we can add one more table if some other people. الله يخليك فؤاد, ممكن بعد إذنك. موجودين هنا هيك في الدخل اللي صارت لجوا. طيب. Fuad can hear us, inshallah. So this is the first time that I teach this Mustalah topic course in English, and it's going to be a challenge for me, but hopefully, inshallah, we'll be able to find our way through it. No matter what we do, Allah yajzak al-khair, no matter what we do, we will require and need to use Arabic terminologies. Yes, we are going to explain the terminologies as much as possible in English so that you understand what they are, but once we move beyond explaining what those terminologies mean, we are going to use the Arabic words for them, because this is what you are going to be reading anytime you pick a book. Even if it's in English, they are going to refer to it all the time. So our first step is that we are going to have a pretty long list of Arabic terms, how they're pronounced and what they mean in English. And you have to keep this running list because you will refer to it over and over and over again. I'm hoping that maybe in a collaborative way, all of us together, we can just accumulate such a list, post it up on the class, and then we can all refer to it and add to it so it becomes more and more accurate and complete. This book, you have to imagine yourself as if this is your first year in Islamic University, and this will be your introductory book. So this is, whether it's easy or difficult, it's irrelevant, because if you intend to study Islamic studies and you are going to take a Hadith course, whether you are specialized in Quran, in Arabic, in history, whatever, when you would have to have some kind of exposure to Hadith, and this will be your introductory book. So we have to all, أهلا وسهلا. في كرسي للأخت مها؟ طيب. نعم في كرسي, معلش. في كرسي هون. All right. So yeah, this book will be the one that you will be looking after. And in general, this is one of the most organized books that comes to Hadith. This has been printed legally for 7-8 times, illegally for maybe double that amount, and it's the most proliferate book out there. There might be other translations, I don't know, or even print. I was at the RIS recently. I looked pretty hard. I found random Hadith books, but very, very, very little. The majority are maybe fiqh and Quran and stuff like that, and a lot of biographies and seerahs and so on. When it comes to Hadith, it's very, very small. But there definitely is out there. If you look online, you'll find. But for marketing purposes, the crowd for who wants to buy Hadeeth books are rather small, so they don't fill the tables with that type of books anyways. Sheikh Mahmoud al-Tahan, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have his mercy on him and on all of us, passed away pretty recently, about maybe less than 2 months ago. He is from Syria, from northern Syria, from Aleppo, from Halab. He had taught in Syria, and the scholars who are of his generation, they have something common, which they studied Islamic first in Syria, and then once they finished their undergrad, they went to Azhar in Egypt, and they spent in Egypt a good half a dozen years studying and getting specialized. And then after they moved back to Syria and they completed their really big curriculum in Azhar, then they got contracted and they went to Saudi Arabia and they started teaching in Saudi Arabia. So Sheikh Mahmoud is pretty well known, not only in Syria, in Egypt, he's also known in Saudi Arabia as well. He taught in their universities too. And then he became the head of the Kulliyah, the Department of Hadeeth in Kuwait University, Islamic University. In the year 1999, he visited Montreal, where I was there, and the family was there. And I was honored and privileged to be with him for a full month. And I think this was really, one of the best times in my life being with Sheikh Mahmoud. SubhanAllah, like sometimes you work hard trying to see people, and other times things that just come over to you. I remember my brother-in-law, he was in New York, he said, we have a visitor, and he would like to come and, look around in North America. He wasn't planning to go anywhere. So he said, would you accept him to come and visit you in Montreal? Are you free to take some time? Said, sure, who's he? Sheikh Mahmoud Tahan. Okay, I know the book. And then when he came over here, it was like, oh, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, that we had this pleasure of him being with us for a full month. So I know him very well personally, and he's definitely is a very modest, knowledgeable, dedicated scholar, pious. This is what we think. Allah knows best, but yeah, it's certainly an influence. So let's kick it and get started, inshallah. I'm not going to spend too much time at this introduction because we're going to go back to it. But here's the main idea. And another thing that we will have to keep track of is some years of the years where some scholar passed away. Obviously, it's going to be an avalanche of years, but we don't intend to go and memorize all of those. But we have to have a target in our head that there's at least 30 years we have to know them like the back of our hand. We'll get to it as we move forward. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This introduction is by the translator or somebody else, I really don't know. So this is not the book itself. So here it says that Sheikh Mahmoud Tahan, he said in his introduction that, can you see from all the way back there? Okay, you're good? Okay. I do not consider this book, Taysir Mustalah al-Hadeeth, to be a replacement for the work of classical scholars in this field. My only intent was for this book to be a key to those works, a reminder of their content, and a tool to make understanding their meaning easier. So Mustalah is a word we'll talk about in a second. Made easy is like we know, Al-Islam Yusr, easy. Taysir is a derivative of that root word. Taysir is making it easy. So this book is intended to make Mustalah, which is supposed to be complicated, simpler. So what is Mustalah? Mustalah is a word derived from the word salah, which means when two people have disagreement and then they finally agree on something, we say that they made salah or astalaha. So it doesn't matter exactly what is the word shape, but the core is when people agree on certain things. Why do they call it mustalah? Because sometimes the linguistic meaning does not point to the actual used meaning. So two people will have a terminology about something. If you look at it linguistically, you will think it means one thing, but when you see how they are actually using it, it's completely different. That's what's called Mustalah. It's like the set of agreed meanings of certain terminologies. This is what Mustalah actually means. And Ulum al-Hadith is plenty with such Mustalah that language and usage are not overlapping perfectly. Mostly, it's not exactly. طيب. Here, Sheikh Mahmoud, he says, in terms of the content of his book and their order, Sheikh Mahmoud, rahimahullah, he said, with respect to the chapters and their organization, I glean benefit from the approach by Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani in Nukhbat al-Fikr. We'll come back to this in a second. And its explanation. Nuzhat al-Nazar. So we have two books here. And for the core subject matter, I relied for the most part on Ulum al-Hadith by Ibn Salah, as well as its abridgment, يعني اختصار by Imam al-Nawawi, which is called At-Taqrib wa Taysir, and its explanation by As-Suyuti, Imam As-Suyuti, and the title is Tadrib al-Rawi. So these are three, he implied three main players or scholars in this field. And we'll come back to this. I just wanted to point to that. Like, before I move to the next page, or is there any questions to start with?
So the book, we're going like the translation of Taysir Mustalah al-Hadith because I read two names.
One of them, it seemed like is a translator, and the other one is introducing the translator.
Okay, so the book we're actually reading is
Taysir Mustalah al-Hadith by Sheikh Mahmoud al-Tahan. He said here that he made some little changes to the book, and he will refer to them. But in the most part, the flow, the material, all of it is mostly, I would say even 95% is Sheikh Mahmoud Tahan.
Which is introduction to the other partners, right?
Correct. And this is the actual book, Taysir Mustalah al-Hadith. It's not a big book, and even the print inside is pretty big because he intended it to be, easy to look at. You want to add notes, there's a lot of space and so on. All right. So this is a quick look at the table of contents. Just a little smaller. There we go. So the table of content, there's an introduction, then a section or a chapter about the narrations themselves, and a section about the narrators with nothing to do with the narrations. And here, the activity of narrating when one muhaddith or one student is receiving hadith from his sheikh, how is that happening? And then ancillary topics over here. So there's this part mostly, we're not going to go to it. We might just like cherry pick, but in general, this is not a section that is, we come across when we're reading, hadith books in general, contemporary hadith books. But the other ones, mostly we will look at them in various depths. All right, just wanna zoom down on here. So this is the alphabet and and this is the legend as how he can use it. It's pretty straightforward. The kha, okay, alif, a, ba, b, ta, like a T, tha, okay, good. Jim was a J. Ha, he just put an H. Actually, he forgot to put the underscore in here because the ha is the H here. And this is missing here an underscore. Kha, da, the, ra, the, sin, sheen, sad with an underscore, dad with an underscore, tah underscore, the underscore. and the rest are pretty straightforward. The Hamza, and he put an apostrophe for it. All right. So this is the book itself, the Arabic version. This is exactly how it starts. And comparing content to content, this is pretty much very, very close. So if we start reading in here, we're going to start finding that there are terminologies that will face us. And instead of going here, which I will read it word for word, I just want to go first to some basic terminologies that we're going to use all the time, even though it's just single words and we have not learned anything yet, but it does not matter. This. There we go. Fine. So here we're going to explain these main terminologies. All right. So we start with a simpler one that hopefully everyone have heard of them, even if they don't know exactly what it means. The first one is as-sanad. As-sanad. And without al-tarif, it becomes sanad, but we use, say, as-sanad. Literally and linguistically, it's something that depended upon for support. But in hadith terminology, technically in ulum al-hadith, as-sanad is a chain of individuals or narrators leading to the matan, which is the text of the hadith, because the hadith leans on it for support and relies on it for authority. It doesn't matter whether the sanad is complete or incomplete, is authentic or is fabricated. When we have a text of hadith, in order to evaluate it, we have to look at the sanad, and that's what we look at. So the second item with it is the matan, which he already mentioned it over there. The matan in here literally is hard, raised part of the ground. I don't know how exactly, it's maybe because matan is something that is higher on top. And hadith terminology, it is the text at which the sanad ends. So when we have the narrators narrating a certain text, we don't see this text until the last narrator, which actually is the first one, just says whatever he said. It could be a saying, it could be a description, it could be a historical observation, it could be hadith qudsi, it doesn't matter. Anything that the isnad ends at is considered to be matan. So these things, sanad and matan, is something that, is proliferate all over, needless to say. Al-hadith, literally, it means something new. Its plural is ahadith. In sciences of hadith, al-hadith is any statement, action, approval, or description ascribed to the Prophet ﷺ. So a statement is when we have a sanad that ends that the Prophet ﷺ said something. This is a statement. Or the Prophet ﷺ did something. He didn't say anything, but he did something. The Sahabi was describing what the Prophet ﷺ did. So that's an action. Approval. Someone came, did something in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ did not stop him. This is an implied agreement. It's called an approval. Or description. If somebody describes what the Prophet ﷺ looked like, or what his clothes looked like, or his beard, or what have you, this also is considered to be a hadith. Okay, now we start with a new term called al-khabar. Sometimes we read ja'a fil khabar. It has been narrated in the khabar. Okay, is this different than hadith or what? So al-khabar literally means report, but in ulum al-hadith, there are three different opinions. That's why when we find a word khabar that's narrated or that's used in a paragraph, we have to recognize who the author of that book so that we understand which one of those did the author use to mean or intended to mean by the word khabar. First opinion is that khabar and hadith are the same, identical, doesn't matter, they're interchangeable. The second is that it's distinct from it, completely distinct. They don't overlap. Hadith is reported from the Prophet ﷺ, while khabar is from others. So you say, جاء في الخبر عن سيدنا عمر أنه كان يخرج. It has been narrated in the khabar that Sayyidina Umar used to go out to the streets of Medina and look around. The Prophet ﷺ is not involved in this story. So we don't say جاء في الحديث أن سيدنا عمر, he used to do this and that. You say جاء في الخبر. And whenever you want to narrate something about the Prophet ﷺ, you never say جاء في الخبر أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم did this or that. You use al-hadith. So this is the second opinion. And the third one is more general, that khabar is a big circle that includes everything. Whether whomever said anything, we call it all khabar, plural akhbar. And the hadith is specifically for the Prophet ﷺ, and it's a smaller circle inside this big circle. So we can say that the Prophet ﷺ, it was narrated in the khabar. Why? Because that smaller circle falls in a big circle. So it's that the khabar is more general than the hadith. Hadith is reported from the Prophet ﷺ, while khabar is from him ﷺ, as well as others. Are we good? Al-athar literally means remnants, whatever is left. You say the footprints of the camel or footprints of a person on the sand, that's his athar. Technically, there are again two different opinions. That athar is the same thing as hadith, makes no difference. And B, is distinct from it. Okay, what is it? Statements and action ascribed to the Sahaba and the Tabi'een followers, the generation after the companion. So only Sahaba and the Tabi'een, if we narrate something about what they said, what they did, how they looked like, we use the term athar. When we go beyond these generations, and we use khabar, and athar is limited to those. So what I'm saying, in other words, is that when you look at different books, you're going to find these three terms existent, and you have to be sensitive in trying to understand what the author and the writer is trying to tell you over here. All right? Al-isnad, it has two meanings, one as a noun and the other one as a verb. Has two meanings. A, the first one is attributing a statement to the one who made it. So al-isnad, it's when somebody is narrating, he's saying something, and then he follows up by saying the isnad, or he says the isnad and then says the statement. So this action is a verb of isnad, making isnad. And the second is a noun. Isnad is in itself the chain of individual. When I say Sheikh Alif and Sheikh Ba and Sheikh Jim, scholar A, scholar B, scholar C, then they are the chain. Then this is in the meaning of B here, the chain of individuals leading to the matan, which we already took over here, which is same as sanad. So B and sanad are the same. Make sense so far? Let me move the document a little bit up. I make it a little bigger. Musnad. Manish, forgive me. I need to get the Arabic word clear for those who don't know it. Al-Musnad. There's a fatha on top of the noon. So al-Musnad, literally something that has been attributed to someone. Okay, so this is from language perspective. But in hadith, it has three different meanings depending on the context. Any book in which the narrations of each Sahabi, companion, are collected separately. What does that mean? In general, there are multiple ways. If there's a sheikh who has 1,000 hadith, How is he going to write those hadith and put them in a book? There's multiple ways. One way is say anything that I'm going to narrate for Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Uthman. Then he puts everything for Sayyidina Abu Bakr together in one paragraph. And then everything that is for Sayyidina Umar next, and so on. This is called the Musnad. That's why Imam Ahmad in his book, Musnad Imam Ahmad, is arranged in that way. There's a different way, which is not mentioned here, but I'm just going to add it for benefit. It's called Mu'jam, where the Sheikh would say, anything I narrated from my Sheikh A, then he puts everything he narrated from his Sheikh A. And then he says, next is anything I narrated from my Sheikh B, and he puts them all together. This is called Mu'jam. And then finally, then there are the normal ways, or now we call it normal ways, where they will say, okay, anything that has to do with water, with going to the washroom, مسح على الخفين, and so on. It's according to the fiqh abwab. This is called sunan. And these are the three ways. So we can never call Musnad Imam Ahmad sunan, because even though there are sunan in it, but the way it's written and presented, على أبواب المثانيد, according to the mathanid, according to isnad, not according to the meaning of the hadith. So the first item in here, al-Musnad, is a book in which the narrations of each Sahabi companion are collected separately. Yes?
So for Musnad Imam Ahmad,
No.
that means for each hadith, there is a chain of narrators. So does he go by each Sahabi? Then he has a different chapter for him, or is it for the very first narrator?
I don't know if there's even a certain pattern. So once he starts with Sayyidina Abu Bakr, everything he puts for Sayyidina Abu Bakr could be as for us random, but he did not put subcategories. It's everything, it's just like one after the other with no separations, with no nothing. And then he goes to Sayyidina Umar, he does the same, and so on.
Yeah, but I mean when the hadith is said, for instance, عن أبو بكر عن عبد الله بن عمر عن عمر بن الخطاب, like as the chain goes, so does he have different chapters for each of the narrators of
No.
the same hadith?
Just the one who spoke something about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the last one.
Okay.
But the margin would be the last person, right?
The first person. Okay, this is a new word here that he throws in here. The marfu' hadith was a muttasil and connected sanad. Okay, this is too much in one sentence and new for us. We'll come to this in a second, but let's go with the C because it's the easy one. Musnad is the same as sanad. You could put a question mark next to it because this is definitely not okay. What you might find somebody say this hadith is musnad, which means it has its own sanad, but this does not mean that the word musnad is a synonym to the sanad itself. You don't ask where is the musnad of this hadith as if you're asking where is the sanad of this hadith. But the idea is there. It's the same root word. It's okay. Probably the Arabic, if I looked, I would find a different understanding of what Sheikh was trying to say here, different than the translation. But okay. So let's go with those two, and there will be some couple of new ones in here. This word here is marfu'. If I read clearly here, I should have typed it in Arabic in here. Maybe I could do that. Give me a small second, I can do this. I don't think this is gonna work. There's a lag. Oh, the lag is going to come. So al-marfu'. Al-marfu'. This is the second meaning of the hadith musnad. Hadith with a muttasil sanad. So what he's saying is that if somebody says this hadith is musnad, what does it mean? It means two things. Number one, that the end of the isnad is the Prophet ﷺ, not a sahabi, not a tabi'i. It's from the saying or something related to the Prophet ﷺ. And second, and this is important, apparently the chain is connected. But if you go and do a research and you scrutinize the isnad, you might find that it has a flaw or there's a disconnection. But on first sight, it seems complete. Why? Because if I give you a hadith and then there's a gap of 2 generations between it, you never say this hadith is musnad because it has a big gap. So musnad is almost like a first screen of whether the isnad is complete or incomplete. If it's incomplete, you don't use the word musnad. You use the word munqati' or mu'dal or something else that we'll come to later on. But if you take a quick look and you say, well, this looks to be complete, then you say, okay, this hadith is musnad, which means I'm going to roll up my sleeves and going to look to see if it is actually authentic or not. If the hadith is missing a chain, a person in the middle, then you say, you know what, it's missing someone. It's obviously it's weak, it's incomplete. You don't call it musnad. All right? These terminologies now, some of them, they're not too accurate, but it's terms that you would see. So here's the first one, is muhaddith. Muhaddith is like a term that almost useful for everyone who works in hadith. So one who works extensively in the area of hadith, studying its riwayah. Riwayah, it means narration, aspects related to the sanad, and diraya. This is a new term. These two terms, al-riwayah wa diraya, is ideas that maybe you don't see them very often, but they mean they have good meaning, important meanings, because they separate the subject into studying the isnad and studying the matan itself. Diraya is related to the matan in here. So aspect related to the matan and not to the sanad. And al-muhaddith is well acquainted with very many of the narrations as well as the states of their narrators. They don't mention anything here that he's supposed to be memorizing, but previously when they used to say someone is muhaddith, it means he knew everything by heart. Like right now, somebody can have a huge library, has good access, has good knowledge, can scrutinize hadith and study hadith and give reliable judgments on them without knowing them by heart. But before, if you didn't memorize it, you didn't have anything, because the majority of the material was all is in the chest and in the memories of people. So a muhaddith, when somebody was called a muhaddith, it means by default that they knew things by heart. Already? Al-Hafiz, there are two opinions. Again, take all of these with a grain of salt. Like, don't ever, if you see a Hafiz, don't turn back to this page and see what do they mean. This person must fall in one of those two. Those terms are used loosely. They are just like almost titles for people who are extensively in hadith. Synonymous with muhaddith, according to many scholars of hadith, or an even higher degree than the muhaddith, such that what he knows at every tabaqa, as every generation, every group of narrators, is more than what he does not know. Okay. What we know for a fact is that there's a lot of people who are called muhaddis, but not as many called hafiz. So when we say, for example, everybody says, who's the most famous muhaddis or famous hadith scholar that you know? Probably first name you would jump to is Ibn Hajar. And most, when we say Ibn Hajar, You don't say al-Muhaddith ibn Hajar. We all say al-Hafiz ibn Hajar because we know that this is a higher, title than Muhaddith. Even though linguistically, al-Muhaddith is somebody who works in Hadith. Al-Hafiz is somebody who memorizes Hadith. Hafiz, yahfaz, it means memorizes. Hafz al-Quran. Hafiz, it means he memorizes. So both of them memorize Quran. There's no difference between this and that. The third one is a very rare title, not used, barely you could see it in couple. There's maybe one or two very famous scholars who are titled with this one, but it does not mean that they have a special status that other ones who don't have this title are not on the same level. And it's called Al-Hakim, one that has very thorough knowledge and familiarity with all of the ahadith such that very little escapes him. The most famous, obviously, scholar who this title is used to is Al-Hakim al-Naysaburi, who has a book, it's called Al-Mustadrak, and he passed away in the year 405. But apart from that, again, grain of salt is very useful here. Al-Musnid, this is with an I here. The one that we had here was Al-Musnad with an A. There's a difference between the two. So Al-Musnad is the one who does the action of doing the Isnad. Al-Musnad over there is someone that the action of Isnad happened on them. And that's why we said that was the chain of narration. But now we're talking about a person. This person is the one who is giving out the Isnad. So he is the doer. He is the subject. He is the Musnad. So one who narrates the hadith with its chains, regardless of whether he has knowledge about it or not. This is good, because not everyone who memorizes things by heart is considered a scholar of hadith. He could be a great, an excellent person who memorizes hadith, can relay it without a single mistake, but you ask him about the meaning or comparing to hadith, he will tell you, you know what, I'm just a messenger. I will just relay this to you. So at the Musnad, it's usually, rarely you would find someone who has only just a single title. They probably say Al-Musnad al-Hafiz al-Muhaddith, and they would put it all together because most of those scholars have multiple, traits. Al-Hujjah is like someone who has a higher argument or evidence or the proof, one whose knowledge encompasses 300,000 hadith. I think you need a little bit more than a grain of salt over here. So I wouldn't even stop. And finally, Amir al-Mu'mineen, the prince of the believers, fil hadith, in hadith sciences, renowned during his time for memorization, expertise, and thorough study, thus placing him among the most distinguished authorities and leading scholars of his era, Amir al-Mu'mineen. There's a whole bunch who are used this term for them, deservedly. Obviously, Hafiz ibn Hajar is one of them, and he's the most famous. So again, this is it follows pretty much what Sheikh Mahmoud Tahan, rahimahullah, he mentioned in his book. And let's continue, and then we will go back and fill up the gaps that we jumped over. Is there any questions regarding this? Go for it. أيوة.
Is this the actual translation where you were talking about the Muslim?
Yes, let me see what they said.
It's just I didn't understand the example that you gave. Yeah, the marfu' hadith with the muttasil sanad.
What does marfu' mean?
Marfu' on its own, I understood that it's invalid.
Marfu', it means something that a chain of narrators that ends with something the Prophet ﷺ did or said. Marfu' is like highly valued. So when you say hadith marfu', it means it's not a saying of the Sahabi. It's not saying of the students of the Sahabi. When we say marfu', it means it's exclusively something the Prophet ﷺ did or said. So that's why when he used here the marfu', this is very short terminology just to tell you something relates to the Prophet ﷺ. And okay, what about the isnad? Is it existent or non-existent? He's telling you, when I say this hadith is musnad, you have to understand two things. Number one, it's about the Prophet ﷺ, and its isnad is apparently intact. It doesn't, it could be an isnad of liars or Amir al-Mu'mineen in hadith, doesn't matter. The isnad is complete. There's no gaps, there's no missing chunks of the isnad. You still have to do the whole work. It does not give you any hint regarding the quality of the isnad. We're good?
So the terms sanad, hadith, and musnad, they're all exclusive to Prophet, right? These words come up if we're using these words.
The sanad term is generic. Any text needs something to be supported on, which is a list of narration. This list of narration is called sanad.
Okay, but technically, underneath the word defines technically, it says hadith, right? And then the hadith part says anything relating to the Prophet, action, statement.
We had three opinions, right? One
Under the hadith, there's just one.
Yeah, let's bring it down. For the hadith, it's only one. And again, like they're trying to put together is, you know, a lot of text and material that not everything falls perfectly in this division, but it helps to be in a general sense, it's like that. So when we say hadith, it has a sanad. When we say a khabar, it has a sanad. When we say it's an athar, it has a sanad. So the sanad is a generic term. It's not only. Here he made a small exclusion. He said, if I, instead of a sanad, I use the term musnad, then I'm limiting it to the Prophet ﷺ. Whatever that, when it's to the Prophet ﷺ, you're saying we call it hadith only. Fine.
Yeah.
Fine. Okay, if you want to call it, it's a hadith with a complete sanad, then it's equal to a musnad. Mashi? You will find there definitely are exclusion. And not only in this, in the whole subject. Whatever we're studying right now, there are keys, but the hadith science is cumulative. If you just study intro like this, it will give you an idea. And the learning curve will be very steep in the beginning because there's so many things that are so new. But later on, once you start digging deeper, you're going to find that each scholar, when he uses his own book, he writes his own book, uses his own terms, he has his own lexicology. He has his own word. And to a certain degree, they jive with each other, but they don't necessarily need to be identical to each other. This, I will come to this in a second. This happened later on. Those people who wrote the books about asanid in the beginning, and I will come to the years because it's important, they were not talking to each other. 200 years later on, when the scholars started collecting all these books together and started trying to uniform the terminology, that's when these things started appearing. But before that, it was not, this came after the fact. The first fact is just, the first interest was capturing everything the Prophet ﷺ said, or the Sahaba. They had no thought about, let's put it in a scientific terminology so that people will know which terms means what. This happened later on. We'll come to this later on. Any other questions regarding this? All right. All right, this is courtesy of Hafiz ibn Hajar. Because the other scholars before Hafiz ibn Hajar, their approach to presenting hadith subjects was not, it did not follow any rational steps. Hafiz ibn Hajar, he got all of the topics, he put it in a container, he shook the container, and then he drew the topics back out like a faqih, because the fuqaha, the scholars of fiqh are very organized in their thoughts. The muhaddithin is just trying to put everything together, and organization is something secondary to them. So Ibn Hajar in here, now he said, okay, enough with that old presentation method, let us present it in a new way, and this is the new way that he presented it. So he said, okay, so this is actually a backbone or the skeleton of how the hadith is looked at. So the categories of khabar and hadith. it will be split based on different criteria. Some of the criteria, one of the criteria is how it reached us, and here to on whom it is ascribed. Let's start with the simpler one. To whom it's ascribed. Who said the text? You have a text, we have an isnad, and at the end of isnad, we have the text. And in this text, it says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm saying hadith, not Quran. Allah said that I forbade injustice on me. Hadith Qudsi, as we know. So this we call it Hadith Qudsi in here, because it's ascribed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The idea is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, directly or indirectly, inspired the Prophet ﷺ with the meaning, but the Prophet ﷺ used his own terms. That's why we don't call it Quran, it's called Hadith. And it could be narrated by meaning, it doesn't have to be narrated exactly by the terminology. Okay, what if the text is about the Prophet ﷺ, his saying, how he looked, what he did, what he approved, then we call this marfu'. Okay, what if it was about the Sahaba, something that Sayyidina Umar did, Sayyidina Abu Bakr did, Abu Huraira did, or Sayyidina Anas did. The Prophet ﷺ is not mentioned in the text, it's something about the Sahaba. Sayyidina Ali did this, Sayyidina Ali did that. What do we call this text? We call it mawquf. Mawquf, the origin word is waqafa, which means to stop, which means as if the isnad was going towards the Prophet ﷺ, and then it hit the brakes and it stopped at the Sahabi. It did not continue. We call it mawquf. So sometimes we say, this hadith is weak, marfu', but sahih, mawquf. I didn't give you very much words, but I told you that the isnad to the Prophet ﷺ, it has been narrated by an isnad to the Prophet ﷺ, and that isnad is weak. But this hadith also has another isnad where it stops at the one of the companions, and this isnad is healthy and authentic. So I can tell you very simply, this saying is weak, marfu', sahih, mawquf. You should understand exactly what I'm saying here. You know, there's two asanid, one of them weak, one of them sahih, one of them is for the Prophet ﷺ, and the other one is for one of the companions. Maqtu'a. So this is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is for the Prophet ﷺ, this is for the Sahaba, and this is for the Tabi'een and anyone beyond them. And we call it maqtu'. Qata'a maqtu'. Maqtu' is like severed. Yes.
So that's when we're talking about hadith, like not.
When you say maqtu', دخلنا في الأثر.
No, it becomes an athar, but like from the context, are we like kind of thinking that the tabi'i did hear from the Prophet?
Not necessarily. Sometimes, you know, the tabi'i is showing you how to make wudu, and he didn't say anything. Or it could be an Sayyidina Ali, for example, how did he interact with the Khawarij, with the people, the sect that deviated from him and split away from them? The Prophet ﷺ has nothing to do with that. It's descriptive of how Sayyidina Ali interacted with them. How Sayyidina ibn Abbas, what did he say to Sayyidina Ali? We say this is a conversation that is mawqufi, because it's between Sayyidina ibn Abbas and Sayyidina Ali. Sometimes it's like what you said, it relates to something that they understood from the Prophet ﷺ.
It comes in explaining al-ghayb, that something that unforeseen or Jannah and stuff like that. Then
sometimes they will say, you say this is mawquf, but له حكم المرفوع. If like somebody said in Jannah there's so and so. They wouldn't be able to say there's so and so for Jannah, unless we would say, but they would always add a thing, because what if somebody has met with the people of the book? Sayyidina Abu Huraira, he met with the people of the book, and sometimes he would narrate something. The person listening to Sayyidina Abu Huraira would think that he is implying that the Prophet ﷺ said it, while in reality, he's narrating about what he heard from the people of the book, because he could have heard people of the book saying something about Jannah. It doesn't have to be. So you have to be careful. They would identify. You would say, his hadith has been mingled with the people of the book. So when is the case, is what you said, we don't presume the implication is that the Prophet ﷺ. But other Sahabi never intermingled with any people of the book. موقوف لا نصدق ولا نكذب. We don't believe it, we don't deny it, unless it is against something we already believe. No. كعب الأحبار and so on. No. You're Muaz?
Yes.
All right.
The marfu',
مرفوع.
they would include
description of the Prophet, so not like what he said.
Yes.
People describe being like his physical.
If somebody said the Prophet ﷺ, for example, had 13 hairs that were white, this is a hadith marfu'. He didn't say a thing. It's a Sahabi describing the Prophet ﷺ. How he walks is considered marfu' because it relates to something about the Prophet ﷺ. ماشي؟ No.
The mawquf and the maqtu' has nothing to do with the Prophet.
Unless it's indirectly implied, like the example we were saying. But yeah, exactly. If somebody said the Prophet, Sayyidina Umar, when he was Khalifa, he used to go through the streets and knock at the doors and ask about if anybody needs help. This is mawquf. Has nothing to do with the Prophet ﷺ. It's an isnad that ends about Sayyidina Umar and what he did and what he said. The conversation between Sayyidina Umar and Sayyidina Ibn Abbas about what do you think about this matter? Because Sayyidina Ibn Abbas was one person among the council of elders at Sayyidina Umar. The Prophet ﷺ has nothing to do with it. This is all hadith mawqufi.
But you wouldn't call it hadith, you would call it khabar or athar.
You will find that it will come loose. It's not going to change a lot from here. It's more important to understand marfu' and mawquf. These two in particular are, they're quite strict about them. But the hadith and khabar and hadith and khabar and asar is just, it's almost interchangeable.
This is very important because yet, despite that not being Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, but still Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, "Alaykum bi sunnati wa sunnati." So even the Prophet advised us to know more about what they used to do. So,
but this is a technicality. When you're describing how Sayyidina Umar,
comes like, why do we include this in hadith?
Because you need to do the same, use the same tools and sciences to verify whether this thing that's narrated about what Sayyidina Umar did is authentic or not. You are going to look into the isnad and the narrators one by one in the same scrutiny that you do for Sayyidina the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Coolio?
All four of these are stackable, right? Like,
These four?
Yeah, I understand that each one of these are used.
What do you mean
describe
stackable?
The subject. Qudsi for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, marfu' for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yeah.
And then essentially the companions and then the tabi'in.
They're one after the other.
So you have a student that's saying, well, I heard from.
Yeah, you could find
Right, so they're all stackable is what I'm saying.
Yeah, you could add one additional link and then you will get to the next item.
Yeah.
So you could have Muhadeeth who narrated from Sheikh A, B, C, D, he stopped here. And the same isnad A, B, C, D, and then with E, and you stopped here. And then with F, and you stopped here. Yes. Okay? Okay, so this is the separation of a hadith based on who said what, or no, who said it, or who is it related to. So these four, and then we go to the other side. Now we were talking about the matan. Okay, you see all of these have the isnad to get to this hadith marfu', the isnad to get to this hadith mawquf or this maqtu'. We didn't say a thing. It could be a fabricated isnad. It could be the top isnad, doesn't matter. We still are going to categorize them in here. If I told you I have a book on hadith al-Qudsi, that means everything in it is قال الله تعالى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said. But all of the asanid are different. Some of them could be excellent. Some of them could be terrible. Other could be fabricated. Has nothing to do. When you categorize hadith or you group hadith based on this, you are not getting into the evaluation of the isnad at all. All right. So on the other hand, in here, now we're talking about the isnad, the chain, the narrators. Okay. So the first is head count. Head count. If I have a hadith, first of all, I want to see, is this hadith ahad or mutawatir? Ahad is a word, Arabic word, obviously. The root is wahad, ahad. It does not really mean intended in here. Terminology is not intended to mean one, intended to mean countable. And mutawatir intended to mean non-countable. So what they're saying, if there's a certain narration, when we went to go and evaluate it, we found there's so many ahadith. We look in Iraq, there's 3-4 asanid. We look in Egypt, there's 3-4 asanid. We go to Yemen, 4-5. We go to Syria, and Sham, there's so many. This single hadith, and when we put it all together, there's so many hadith. We call it mutawatir. Mutawatir, tawatar, it means one after the other. If you go through dictionaries or the translations, they're going to say successively. I don't like the word successively because it means one after the other. This is not successive, one after the other. This is all at the same time. You have, for this single hadith, you have 15 different isnad. All of them are acceptable or higher. This we call it mutawatir. Okay, what if it's not mutawatir? We call it ahad. So it could have, ahad could have 3 asanid, could have 4, could have 1, but we still call it ahad. Ahad, it means singular, it means it's countable. Oh, you know, this hadith, إنما الأعمال بالنيات. No, maybe we shouldn't use إنما الأعمال بالنيات. لولا أن أشق على أمتي لأمرتهم بالسواك عند كل صلاة. Had I, because I'm afraid that I'm going to be too hard on my ummah, otherwise I would have ordered them to use siwak for every time they go for prayer. So this hadith has a very few number of asanid. It's authentic hadith. It's countable. So we call it hadith ahad. So all of the universe of the hadith is divided into 2 groups, mutawatir wa ahad.
What's the number we're talking about?
What do you think?
Like 10, 11, 12.
You mean the number of asanid that's required or the number of ahadith mutawatira?
No, the number of asanid to count it mutawatir or ahad.
What they said is that, first of all, as a rule of thumb, in the books, they will say 10. But 10, where 8 of those asanid come from one city and 2 from different city, is different than 2 from 5 different cities. So not all 10s are created the same. So you have to have that kind of sense to feel that this abundance of number of asanid also provides you with the definite conviction that this hadith can never be, what do you say, شو تقول مصطلح they نعم fabricated عم بلش بصيغة كنت fabricated, it cannot be fabricated. But if you have 8 people who are in a single city, you know, there might have been one sheikh who narrated to different people and somehow it got in there. But when you have so many different cities and different shuyukh and even different sahaba, it cannot all converge on Sayyidina Abu Hurairah. This will never be mutawatir. It has to be an abundant number of sahabi as well, in order that it's considered to be mutawatir. They use 10, but in the same sentence, they will tell you, as long as those 10 provide you the total conviction that those narrators can never have together decided to make up this hadith.
You also said if it's acceptable or above. So
Is
hasan
acceptable or above?
like
Yeah.
hasan or sahih. So then, like, can it be mutawatir if we have like a good number of like a hadith hasan, or does it have to have a?
No, Hasan is considered equal to Sahih in terms of use and as evidence. Yeah, it will.
It has to come from 10 different Sahaba.
Yes.
To count as mutawatir.
Yeah. So let's say there's one Sahabi and there's 10 students of the Sahabi who narrated, and then those 10 students of this one Sahabi had 50. So we say this hadith is mutawatir ila Abi Hurairah. But if Abu Hurairah made a mistake and he did not remember it accurately, everybody is going to be mistaken too. So we are sure that Abu Hurairah said it, but we cannot be 100% sure that.
Mutawatir for Abu Hurairah, but not.
صح. All right. Okay. The number of total hadith that are available is it depends on what we're talking about. We have to be talking apples to apples here. Probably the number of different hadiths that are out there and available is in the order of somewhere between 50,000 to 100,000 different hadiths. But if you go and count the number of asanid that's out there, it's probably almost like 1 million, because every single hadith might have multiple asanid, and it just like widens as you go further into the generation and into centuries. There's more and more people who are narrating this hadith. It starts with one sahabi, goes to 10 tabi'in, from 10 tabi'in goes to 50 tabi'in, and then who can count beyond that? And this is considered to be a single, each isnad is considered to be hadith. So for example, Imam Abu Zur'a, he said that he used to memorize 600,000 hadith. Imam Bukhari, he said that he memorizes 100,000 hadith that's sahih and 200,000 hadith that are not sahih, but in his mind, he knows them by heart, and they are considered to be sahih, considered to be hadith as well, because he needs to know the fabricated hadith, the one with the defects, so that he can always pull it out from a pool of acceptable hadith, and so on. So the number of like a million hadith is really possible. It's not something an exaggerated number. We're not saying million different hadiths. We're saying million isnad for the 100,000 hadiths that probably are out there. All right. So this is mutawatir and ahad. How many hadiths mutawatir are there out there? Do you think? No. There's some books that will bring it up to 500, but that's a little bit loose. Probably somewhere between 100 and 500. So if you want to say something like 200-300, probably that is the number. All right. So now, once we are, so mutawatir in here, you tell me how many they are. We said, okay, probably 10. So then we go back here and we say, okay, forget about the mutawatir for a while. Let's speak about the ahad, which is a hadith that comes with a countable head count. So let's separate those two again. How do we want to separate it? We're going to separate it by whether the hadiths that came are authentic hadith or not. So this, the criteria is whether they are based on acceptance and rejection. Why didn't we do it here? Because all the mutawatir are accepted. They are not subject to this test in here. All the mutawatir are completely accepted. So the hadith al-ahad, then we can screen them and group them based on what is accepted and what's not accepted. Or we can classify them and group them based on the number of isnad each hadith came with. So if it came here, you don't need to write this because we will read it in a chapter on its own. This is just like just a quick glance. Mashhur, wa aziz, wa gharib. Gharib, if it came from only a single isnad. You have this one hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said this, and you go all over in all books of hadith looking for a second isnad, there's only one isnad. So we call this hadith gharib. This term gharib is used also in different places, as we'll see, but in general, it's when you see that the isnad gharib, it's usually intended to mean that it has only this one singular isnad. Aziz, it means it has two asanid. And mashhur is any number above Aziz, above 2, and below that. So all this window between this and that falls under mashhur. And this term is not used very much. So, I mean, you want to write it or not, I don't think you're going to miss a lot if you don't. Aziz is also not used very much. Gharib is used extensively with various meanings. So it's something you need to focus on, that you have to understand what does gharib. Gharib and linguistically means strange. There's a whole chapter on gharib that we will read, inshallah. حاضر. اسناد وغريب. Yeah. When they say gharib and they mean in the matan, now they're talking about words inside the sentences that has a meaning ununderstood exactly what it means. So there's one word linguistically in Arabic that its meaning is not very clear. So they say they use it, the term gharib, when they use it with the matan. But when they use it in the isnad, they mean account. All right. So if we get to those hadith ahad and we classify them based on whether they're accepted or rejected, we have two groups, accepted and rejected. If we look at the rejected, why are they rejected? It could be one of two reasons. The first reason is because when we're looking at the isnad, when we're looking at the chain of narrators, there's an omission in the isnad. Remember, over here, we're just talking about, this has nothing to do with the meaning of the hadith. We're only focused on the chain of narrators. and the health of the chain of narrators. It got rejected. But for what defect? It could either be an omission or because of there's no omissions, but the narrator in himself is not strong enough to carry the hadith. So if there's an omission, these are a whole slew of different omissions. And if it's because of the narrator, this is a whole slew that the narrator might be inflicted by one of them. So each one of those is a chapter on its own in the book. And if the hadith is accepted, did we say Hasan or Sahih here when we said accepted? We didn't mention it because both Hasan and Sahih fall in the accepted. We call them hadith maqbool, accepted hadith. Sahih is a strong one. Hasan is less strong, but still accepted. The umbrella for both is accepted hadith, hadith maqbool. Okay, how do we split them? Based on level of authenticity, the quality of the isnad. It already passed the hurdle of being accepted, but now here we're giving it like a rating above that bare minimum level, the threshold that it already crossed. So these are the different levels. And based on implementation, sometimes you have a hadith that is no longer implemented. You cannot use it because it has been abrogated. So even though its isnad is good, the matan is good, and everything is good, but it's no longer something that is being put to practice anymore. So mansukh. Mansukh.
It doesn't apply to this situation.
It doesn't.
If there's a hadith that like applied مثلا في وقت الحق ولكن not في وقت السلم إن شاء الله.
No, it means it still can be applied later on. This is mansukh permanently. Permanently. So in general, this is a big picture about hadith. So we still have 15 minutes. We're now going to get exposed to some dates. Here. Okay, I want to start here. If you notice that anytime he puts a name of an author in small print, he puts the year in Hijri that he passed away. So it might be too small, but if you have it on your own iPad or on your laptop, you'll be able to see it. So as if anything that happened before Ibn Salah was, past history, and the whole hadith sciences started all over again by the presence of Imam Ibn Salah. Ibn Salah, who passed away in the year 643, he wrote his book that he called Ulum al-Hadith, the sciences of hadith. Everybody calls it Muqaddimat Ibn Salah, the introductory or the introduction of Ibn Salah. You will find it so many places who say, وَقَالَ فِي الْمُقَدِّمَةِ. He said in the introduction. Introduction of what book? No. When he says وَقَالَ فِي الْمُقَدِّمَةِ, he said in the introduction, you will know they are talking about Ibn Salah. So Ibn Salah book became the go-to name. He facilitated all of the different things that were not very clear to many people before. And everybody just started using Ibn Salah as being the converging point for all the hadith sciences. So what happened? Ibn Salah has a number of scholars who made explanations to his own book. We have here certain ones. I want to mention two of them. Al-Iraqi wal-Asqalani. Iraqi is the Sheikh of Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar. Al-Asqalani who ibn Hajar, Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar, who died in the year 852. And Hafiz al-Iraqi, his teacher, died in the year 806. So those two have their own commentary on Ibn Salah. Okay, other people say, well, Ibn Salah is too long. Let's make it a little bit summarized. So they abridged it. And the first one who did this is Imam al-Nawawi by a book called Irshad. Imam Nawawi, he died in the year 676. I don't know what's the number in here. I think it's, it should be 676. And then he made a second abridgment of his book, and he called it At-Taqrib. And this book, even though its name is famous, but the book itself is not as famous. Why? Because this is the more famous book. Imam al-Suyuti, who passed away in the year 911, he wrote a book that's called Tadrib al-Rawi, Training the Narrator by Imam Suyuti, where he took this book and he explained it. So this is now probably the final station of books regarding Hadith Mustalah. This one, our Sheikh Muhammad Awami, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put blessing in his life and extend it. He printed a new edition of this book, Tadrib al-Rawi. So this is mostly where people go to now when they want an expanded book on Hadith sciences and so on. Beyond that is much less. This is finally where things are. Now, even though the arrow goes in here, but this is Ibn Kathir, the author of the famous tafsir. He died in 774. He obviously this arrow should go down here, and Suyuti should be here, so that we maintain the same chronological, axis. So Ibn Kathir, he had the book called Al-Ba'ith al-Hadeeth, and it is also a commentary or an abridgment from this one. This is important. Why? Because the person who printed or who made it popular, the book of Ibn Kathir, this one is an Egyptian scholar. His name is Sheikh Ahmad Shakir. Sheikh Ahmad Shakir, an Azhari, who passed away in the year 1958, which is 1377 Hijri. And he put a good commentary on it. And Sheikh Ahmad Shakir was one of those contemporary scholars who started dabbling in critiquing hadith. Before, everybody was dependent on what Hafiz ibn Hajar said, what Suyuti said, what other people said. They only, just relayed what and they considered themselves incapable of making that judgment. So there was no new work. And suddenly we have now the Sheikh Ahmad Shakir, who worked on part of Musnad Imam Ahmad, who worked on other important books and started critiquing hadith. Oh, this hadith is sahih, this hadith is da'if. Who said? Well, Sheikh Ahmad Shakir did. And when Sheikh Nasr al-Albani and so on came on, Sheikh Shakir is the one who opened their eyes to this work. And even though he did amazing work, but still it was like the new baby steps. No, I shouldn't say baby steps. It's a new initial work in here. And don't forget, everything was still in print. And many things were manuscript, makhtutat. Now we have forget about computers. Now we have the ease of buying any book you want. You'll find it, you can get it in a short period of time it's existed. Before, it was so difficult to find these books that you have to give him so much credit for being capable of doing the quality of work that he did with the limited resources accessible to them, with the amount of volume that they produced. They did an amazing, amazing work. So he opened the door. He said, you know what? Who said we cannot critique hadith? So this book, Al-Ba'ith al-Hadeeth by Ibn Kathir, with a commentary on it from Sheikh Ahmad Shakir, is the key for today's modern movement of hadith sciences and people getting interested in hadith and learning how to do hadith on their own. Sheikh Ahmad Shakir, he used the ratings that were given to the narrators by Hafiz ibn Hajar, and he usually stuck to them, which is something that developed later on. And this is something, inshallah, maybe we'll get a chance to talk about it later on. So I just wanted to underscore this for a bit. So then we go to the other people who also looked at Ibn Salah. What did they do? Nazamu. They made it into a poetry, which is really nice. One of them is, again, Hafiz al-Iraqi, the same Sheikh Ibn Hajar over here. He did Alfiyat al-Iraqi. And there are some commentaries. He did a commentary on it. And there's there are two main Alfiyat al-Hadith, Alfiyat al-Suyuti, Alfiyat al-Iraqi. And most Alfiyat al-Suyuti is difficult. If you want to challenge yourself into memorizing something, go for Alfiyat al-Suyuti. Alfiyat al-Iraqi is much more easier and simpler to memorize. And it's not complicated. There's nothing like Shatibiya or other things that they might be all coded. It's not coded. It's pretty simple. It's easy and it's very self-explanatory. Yeah, and further down. Okay. No. All right. So This is if we start with Mustalah and we stop in here. There are more authors I want to talk about before, but I want to leave the last few minutes in here to get some feedback from you. And so it's 7:22. I want to stop 7-8 minutes early and see if you want to tell me, is this too slow, too fast? Is this the direction you want to go through? And any feedback is fine. I don't have to go and crush it to the last minute and then take a breath at the last minute. So it's okay if we stop 5 minutes early. So I'm going to turn the microphone back to you. And if you have nothing to say, then class is dismissed. Okay, but I would rather have some feedback from you guys too. أخت مها.
You said there's going to be a mix between Arabic and English.
Yeah, because all the terminologies are going to be مرفوع, مقطوع, قدسي, musnad. We're not going to use the translation. We're not going to say the isnad is severed. We're going to still use the terminologies that are English, that are Arabic. We will explain them, but you need to know the words in Arabic and continue to use them. And this will be a lot more difficult when you start going into the narrators and you want to say like this is Hafiz and this is like Da'if and it's Matruk or Hada Salih. Then when you go to those terminologies, you can never translate. We can explain what it means, but we have to stick to the terminology. We will be using also books of narrators, inshallah, Taqrib al-Tahdhib ibn Hajar. I will also send you a link. And we will have some practices together during class where we'll bring in Hadeeth, and then we will pull up those narrators from the books of narrators and see what Hafiz ibn Hajar said about them. And we will try to reconstruct the conclusion and the judgment of other muhaddithin on those isnad, and so on and so forth. I mean, where you want to end up with this course, each one has its own. Some people would like to understand just the history of how hadith was collected and how it was gathered and so on. Other people, they want to know how to judge, and each one has its own understanding. This book will just give you the keys, and once you take these initial steps from there on, you will have to do the rest on your own. Obviously, like we will help and we'll guide you, we'll assist you in going in that direction and efficiently so. But these are the basic tools. You cannot just jump over without finishing the main tools that are in this basic book. Alrighty? وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
Do you have a copy of this book from Arabic?
Do I have a copy? Yes, PDF. Yes, it's existent. It is, but there are multiple. One of them is with harakat. So use the one with the harakat. The Sheikh himself, he said that this one has corrected some mistakes, and it's the one I have in here. I think it's the 7th. The 8th edition. I'll put it up on the Google Classroom. Okay.
You would like to get the hard copy somewhere. Do you have it available?
Hard copy, I don't. We can always ask Sheikh Adnan if somebody want to ship it from Turkey. That's always doable. This book definitely is available. So if we know how many people want it, then we'll ask and we can ship it like we've done with the other ones before. Right now there's 17, but are all of you registered? Like, did all of you fill in the questionnaire? Anyone did not fill the questionnaire? One. That's it. Every single one, they filled the questionnaire. So how many do we have? 3, 1, 2, 3. That's 9, 11, 13, 15. We have 15 people over here. And did you all get the chance to check mark the name? All right. This is one page or 2 page? Okay. You didn't complete it yet? Okay. Do you mind if just quickly, can we just do a name roll just to get an idea of the names, please?
Yeah, Hanan.
Afwan?
Hanan.
Hanan? Afwan? Okay. Sarah? أخت أمل? زينة? أخت مها? أخ معاذ? أخ فؤاد? علي? All right. لذيذ. عبد القادر. طيب. زاهد وأحمد. وجانا. Do you have, okay. طيب بارك الله فيكم الله يجزيكم الخير. We're going to continue inshallah next Wednesday also same time inshallah.